Hey guys, tonight we step back to a time when mornings didn't come with your favorite coffee or the luxury of a warm shower. Instead, you wake in a cramped, drafty room, no heating, no curtains to keep out the cold dawn light. You rub your eyes, hoping the scratchy straw mattress and coarse wool blanket will somehow protect you. But nope, the chill sinks in right through your thin tunic. Outside, the first light of day breaks over a medieval village still smelling faintly of last night's fires and who knows what else. You shuffle barefoot over uneven wooden planks, careful not to step on any stray animal droppings. Because hey, sharing your living space with livestock was standard back then. You probably won't survive this morning routine, and not just because of the cold. Without modern plumbing, your chamber pot is a few feet away, waiting to be emptied, or worse, it might already be overflowing. Fresh water? Good luck. And that breakfast you're hoping for. Think stale bread, sour ale, and maybe some overcooked porridge if you're lucky. No fancy espresso, no toast popping out of a toaster, no instant gratification. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious if you're watching this, just waking up or burning the midnight oil. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day starts with the sound of a cockerel somewhere in the distance, or perhaps the barking of dogs sharing your cramped alleyway. Your family's tiny wooden hut, probably only a few square meters, barely keeps out the wind. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a mixture of sticks, mud, and straw. That's hardly the fortress you'd want when temperatures dip. The floor? Just packed earth, maybe strewn with rushes, which were changed out only once a year. Smelly, sure, but that was better than sleeping on dirt. If you're lucky, you share your room with several family members, and possibly a chicken or two. Yes, animals inside the living quarters were common because the cold made it the only place to keep livestock safe through the night. Which means the smell. Well, it's a unique blend of smoke, manure, unwashed bodies, and wet wool. Spa day, it is not. You shuffle to your chamber pot, a humble ceramic bowl used for, well, you know. There was no flushing here. Emptying it meant carrying the contents out to the cesspit or the street. In many villages, human waste simply went into the streets or rivers, causing no small amount of disease. Historians still argue whether this kind of waste management did more harm than good, but the consensus is that medieval sanitation was a disaster zone. Breakfast rarely meant a hot meal. Often it was just the leftovers from last night, a chunk of hard bread dipped in watered-down ale, or maybe some cheese if your family was well off. Eating raw or undercooked food was common because fires were hard to keep burning all day, and cooking was a chore. Your stomach might protest early. Lack of nutrients and constant exposure to pathogens meant that digestive issues were the norm, not the exception. You might try to wash your face, but water was precious and usually cold. A basin or a bucket might stand near the door, but its contents were reused, and soap was a luxury mostly for the wealthy. Bathing? Once a week at best, if you weren't terrified of catching a chill or scandalizing the neighbors. And the light? The sun is your main clock. No alarm clocks, no soft wake-up tones, just the unforgiving dawn. If you overslept, well, your village's social order wouldn't be kind. The miller or the lord's bailiff might frown, and work waited for no one. You step outside into the cobblestone street, which is more like a slurry of mud, animal droppings, and waste. There's no garbage collection, no street cleaning crew. People dump refuse out their windows or in the gutters. Remember that pungent smell? That's part of your daily landscape. No wonder historians say life expectancy was short. You probably won't make it through the day without feeling at least a dozen discomforts. Lice in your wool, hunger gnawing your belly, or a cough that might mean something worse. And this is just the dawn of your 24 hours in the Middle Ages. You trudge over to the edge of your hut, feeling the chill bite into your bare feet. Morning routines in the Middle Ages come with their own brand of misery, especially when it comes to sanitation. You don't have the luxury of a sparkling bathroom or a flushing toilet. Instead, there's the chamber pot, that humble ceramic or wooden vessel you hope wasn't already used overnight by your siblings or the dog. Emptying it means hauling it out into the street, or worse, into a nearby cesspit, a foul pit meant to collect waste, but often overflowing into the village itself. If you think that's gross, well, hold on to your nose. Medieval waste management was basically a communal disaster. Streets doubled as open sewers. People, animals, and carts all mingled in this bubbling stew of filth. Rivers, which were the main source of drinking water, were often contaminated with human waste upstream. No wonder the phrase, "don't drink the water," could be a matter of life and death, though that exact phrase probably didn't exist yet. Historians still argue whether the practice of throwing waste out of windows was less deadly than the alternative of keeping it inside. Either way, the risk of disease was sky high. Personal hygiene wasn't much better. The idea of daily showers or even weekly baths was alien to most. Water was a scarce resource, and bathing was sometimes feared because of the risk of catching a chill, which was believed to invite illness. Instead, people wiped their faces with cloths and maybe rinsed hands if there was clean water available. Soap was mostly made from animal fat and wood ash, an unpleasant concoction reserved for the wealthy or religious rituals. Lice and fleas were constant companions, living in the folds of your woolen clothing and your tangled hair. The word itchy doesn't begin to describe it. Public bathhouses existed in some cities, often run by guilds or religious orders, but they were controversial. Some clergy decried them as sinful places of temptation, while others saw their health benefits. Yet, outbreaks of syphilis and other diseases made public baths a risky business. In rural areas, you were lucky if you got to bathe once a month, or sometimes only during festivals or before important occasions. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some medieval folks believed that bathing too often washed away a protective layer of natural oils and spirits, leaving you vulnerable to evil spirits or illness. So paradoxically, less cleanliness was sometimes equated with more health. Your morning doesn't get easier when you consider tooth care, or the lack thereof. People used chewing sticks, twigs from aromatic trees, or cloth wrapped around a finger to clean their teeth. Tooth decay and gum disease were rampant, thanks to a diet high in coarse grains and honey, but poor dental hygiene. What about washing clothes? Well, that was even less frequent. Wool garments were expensive and couldn't be washed often without damaging the fabric. Instead, people aired their clothes and brushed them vigorously. The smell? You guessed it. Less than pleasant. If you're imagining the daily routine as some quaint rustic charm, think again. The lack of sanitation made medieval towns some of the smelliest and most disease-ridden places in history. Bubonic plague aside, dysentery, typhoid, and cholera were common killers, often spread through contaminated water and poor waste disposal. By the time you're done with your morning rituals, if you can call them that, your body already carries a cocktail of bacteria and parasites. No wonder the average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, though this figure is a bit misleading because high infant mortality skews the numbers. Still, surviving even a day in such conditions required a strong constitution. And don't think the aristocrats had it much better in terms of cleanliness. While nobles could afford baths and better clothes, they also lived in close quarters with many servants and courtiers. The crowded castle chambers and limited ventilation often meant foul air and grime. Plus, their heavy use of perfumes and powders was sometimes an attempt to mask rather than eliminate the underlying odors. Remember that chamber pot from earlier? Well, in castles and larger towns, they had garderobes, small rooms jutting out from castle walls with a hole leading to the moat or a pit below. If you were unlucky enough to be sitting there during battle, the sounds and smells could be quite distracting. Despite the unpleasantness, Medieval people developed some surprisingly practical sanitation practices. For instance, some towns employed gong farmers, workers paid to clean out cesspits at night, shoveling waste to the outskirts of town. Not the dream job, but essential for keeping settlements functioning. Historians still argue whether medieval urban sanitation systems were evolving toward the early modern sewer systems, or if they were simply inadequate responses doomed to fail until industrial breakthroughs centuries later. Either way, your survival chances plummeted if you drank from polluted wells or waded through filthy streets. So, you've now faced the grim truth of medieval sanitation. Not exactly the fresh start you hoped for this morning, huh? But hold on. Breakfast awaits, and if you thought surviving the toilet routine was bad, wait until you hear what's on the menu. You sit down, or rather slump, onto a rough wooden bench, ready for the medieval version of breakfast. Spoiler alert, it's not what you're used to. No buttery croissants or fresh fruit smoothies here. Your morning meal is likely to be stale bread, tough as a shoe sole, perhaps dipped in some weak ale to soften it up. If you're lucky enough to have cheese or leftover stew, that might appear, but often breakfast was a barely consumed afterthought. The idea of 3 square meals a day is a modern invention. In the Middle Ages, eating was all about what you could scrounge and when. Breakfast was sometimes skipped entirely by peasants who saved their energy for a more substantial midday meal. Nobles might indulge a bit more, but even their breakfast was often a simple affair. Bread, cheese, perhaps some cold meat from the previous day. That ale I mentioned? It wasn't just for fun or celebration, it was often safer to drink than water. Brewing killed off many dangerous microbes lurking in water supplies. Ale was weak by today's standards, more like a nourishing low-alcohol broth. Still, the taste probably made you wince in the morning. If you fancy a little porridge, expect it to be made from coarse barley or oats, cooked with water or milk, and sometimes sweetened with honey or dried fruits. But those luxury items were scarce and costly. Imagine eating this bland mush every morning. It's no wonder that medieval stomachs were perpetually unsettled. Food preservation was a major challenge. Without refrigeration, much food spoiled quickly. Salt was king, used to cure meats and fish, but oversalted meals were common, sometimes leaving you thirstier than before. Vinegar was another preservation tool, and some medieval recipes included sour flavors that might seem odd today. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some monks believed that eating garlic would ward off evil spirits or bad humors, so you might find it sprinkled in dishes or eaten raw by the brave or unlucky. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were actually healthier than modern ones. On one hand, the lack of processed sugars and fast food seems like a plus. On the other, chronic malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and contaminated food often made medieval people weaker and more susceptible to disease. You probably won't find fresh vegetables on the table unless it's spring or summer and you live near a garden. Root vegetables like onions, leeks, and turnips were common, but often bland and fibrous. Fruit was seasonal and mostly a treat for the wealthy. If you were unlucky, your meal could include bits of gristle, insect contamination, or even rodents. Food safety was primitive. Cooking techniques were basic, often over smoky fires, so food was unevenly cooked, sometimes raw in parts or charred black in others. One of the most common medieval beverages was mead, fermented honey water, which was sweet but potent. You might sip mead at celebrations, but for daily drinking, ale or cider was more typical. Wine was largely reserved for the upper class. If you tried to add some spice to your meal, good luck finding any. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or cloves were expensive imports from faraway lands, traded along dangerous routes, and thus a luxury. Nobles sometimes used them to flaunt wealth and mask poor food quality. Breakfast was often eaten quickly and standing up, as labor awaited. You might chew on a hunk of bread during your journey to the fields or workshop. Social dining rituals were largely a later development. Medieval eating was more functional than pleasurable for most. Remember how I said ale was safer than water? That's because water sources were frequently contaminated. Wells could be polluted by nearby latrines, and rivers served as dumping grounds. Some places tried to regulate water quality, but enforcement was lax. A fringe theory suggests some medieval people deliberately avoided certain foods to keep bodily humors balanced, believing that too much rich food led to illness. So if you had to skip breakfast or eat dry bread, it might have been by design, not just necessity. By midday, your stomach is probably growling, but you still have hours of labor ahead. No wonder medieval folk often suffered from chronic hunger and fatigue. Their bodies were working hard, but fueled poorly. If you survive this rough breakfast, your day will continue under the looming threat of disease, hard labor, and social hierarchy. But for now, brace yourself for the invisible dangers creeping in the air and in the rats running under your feet. As you trudge deeper into your day, an invisible menace follows your every step: the plague. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, wiped out a staggering third of the population. But even outside major outbreaks, disease was a constant shadow in medieval life. You rub your hands anxiously, knowing that rats scurry unseen, carrying fleas that bite and spread sickness. You probably won't survive long without encountering some form of illness, because sanitation, diet, and medical knowledge were all disastrously lacking. The air itself seemed thick with danger. People believed that miasma, or bad air, was the primary cause of disease, a theory still debated by historians today, alongside the eventual acceptance of germ theory centuries later. The plague's grip was terrifyingly silent, but deadly. Fleas from infected rats jumped to humans, spreading buboes, painful swellings, and fever. But it wasn't just the plague. Typhus, dysentery, smallpox, and measles all stalked the medieval streets and fields. Your immune system would have been overwhelmed daily by unseen enemies. Curiously, some fringe scholars suggest that medieval people's close contact with animals might have occasionally helped build certain immunities, though this is far from settled debate. Either way, no armor or sword could protect you from these microscopic killers. Life expectancy was low, with many never reaching adulthood. Child mortality was devastatingly high, making the survival of each day a small victory. Villages often felt like haunted places, with funerals as frequent as festivals. In towns, overcrowding made matters worse. Narrow alleys trapped foul smells and limited fresh air. Garbage piled up in streets, breeding grounds for disease. You cough and wonder if that's the start of something worse. Hospitals were rudimentary, often run by religious orders, and offered little more than palliative care and prayer. The fear of plague outbreaks led to some strange and grim social behaviors. Entire villages were sometimes abandoned overnight. Quarantine zones were enforced, often brutally. Some blamed minority groups, leading to persecution and violence. Historians still argue how much these social reactions contributed to the spread or containment of disease. On the bright side, some towns developed rudimentary sanitation laws, like banning dumping waste into rivers or creating marketplaces away from residential areas. These early public health efforts were crude, but showed an awareness of contagion's threat. You might have heard of plague doctors in their eerie beaked masks, but they appeared mostly in later outbreaks. Their costumes, designed to filter bad air, were a mix of superstition and practical protection. Despite the omnipresence of disease, medieval people found ways to cope. Religious rituals, pilgrimages, and superstitions provided some comfort. Folk remedies, from herbs to chants, were common but rarely effective. As you navigate your day, every cough or feverish shiver could mean the end. Survival required a blend of luck, robust health, and a bit of ignorance. After all, not knowing what exactly was killing you sometimes made it easier to carry on. So next time you sneeze or feel a little under the weather, be glad you're not in the Middle Ages. Remember that invisible threat, the plague's silent grip, and how close it lurked in every shadow. You shift uncomfortably in your scratchy wool tunic, the fabric clinging in all the wrong places. Fashion in the Middle Ages wasn't about comfort or style. It was about status, and often, a lot of itchy misery. Your clothes, layered thickly to keep out the cold, are a perfect breeding ground for lice and fleas. Yes, those tiny pests are not just unwanted visitors. They're practically medieval roommates. Your itchy wool garments may carry more than just discomfort. Fleas and lice were vectors for disease, including the deadly plague we just talked about. You might scratch until your skin bleeds, but that only worsens the problem. Soap is scarce, and regular washing of clothes even rarer. Clothes were expensive and often handed down through generations, meaning you wore the accumulated grime of years past. The wealthy tried to distinguish themselves with elaborate clothing, silks, velvets, bright dyes, but even nobles suffered from poor hygiene and infestations. Remember that famous portrait of Henry VIII with his velvet robes? Underneath, he probably battled the same pests as everyone else. Historians debate whether medieval fashion was truly practical or just a form of social suffering. On one hand, layers kept you warm during bitter winters. On the other, the lack of washing and the weight of fabrics made daily life more taxing. Some fringe theories suggest that certain styles deliberately made garments harder to wash, maintaining social divisions. Poor people had simpler, easier-to-clean clothes, while nobles wore elaborate but impractical outfits to display wealth. The fashion scene wasn't just about clothes. Hairstyles, hats, and accessories all signaled rank and role. Common folk might cover their heads with simple linen caps, while knights and nobles sported helmets or ornate hats. Women wore wimples and veils, often stiffened with starch, a practice that sometimes caused headaches or skin irritation. You might also notice that certain colors were reserved for the elite, thanks to the expense of dyes like purple or scarlet. Wearing the wrong color could be a social faux pas or even illegal, as sumptuary laws regulated dress based on class. Speaking of pests, medieval people developed some creative, if gross, remedies. A popular method to combat lice was bathing in vinegar or wearing herbs woven into clothing. Some believed that wearing garlic or fragrant flowers could ward off not just pests, but evil spirits as well. Whether effective or not, it was a source of comfort. Interestingly, some medieval medical texts suggested that rubbing crocodile dung into the scalp could cure baldness, a claim that, while eyebrow-raising, reflects the era's mix of observation and superstition. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in a different context? Medieval treatments often walk that same line between natural remedy and pure weirdness. Your itchy clothes, combined with the daily grime, might cause skin infections or rashes. But complaining about it wasn't an option. Everyone shared these burdens. Bathing less frequently meant skin was often cracked or scaly, inviting further infections. Footwear, if you had any, was usually made from leather, crudely stitched and often ill-fitting. Bare feet were common among peasants, exposing you to cuts and infections as you walked over rough, dirty ground. You also had to contend with the seasonal changes. Wool was great for winter but unbearably hot in summer, and changing clothes frequently was a luxury few could afford. The medieval wardrobe was more about endurance than fashion statements. So, your day in itchy, pest-ridden clothing continues, scratching here and there, trying not to look too desperate. It's a daily misery that you might not have thought about before, but it was part and parcel of surviving medieval life. Remember, though, those itchy garments were a badge of survival in a time when clean clothes and good hygiene were rare luxuries. And the next time you complain about an itchy sweater, be glad you're not wearing layers of unwashed wool alongside fleas and lice. You try to move from place to place, but even a short journey is an ordeal. Roads are muddy, uneven, and mostly unpaved, more like trenches carved through the countryside than smooth paths. Horse-drawn carts are rare luxuries, and where they do exist, The wheels often get stuck in deep ruts or sink into soft soil. Most people travel on foot, and your legs ache from walking on stones, mud, and sometimes animal waste. Bridges over rivers are few and far between, so crossing means detours, wading through water, or relying on rickety ferries. Traveling even a few miles can take hours or days, and bandits lurk in forests and lonely paths, ready to rob or worse. If you're lucky, you'll join a group for safety. Medieval travel was also hampered by the lack of reliable maps or signposts. You navigate by landmarks, sun position, or the advice of locals. Getting lost was common and dangerous, especially for women traveling alone. Markets and fairs bring some respite, but reaching them requires a long journey. For many peasants, the idea of visiting a town or distant village is a rare treat, reserved for special occasions or emergencies. Animals are essential for transport, but also a burden. Horses, donkeys, and oxen require food, shelter, and care, which many peasants can't afford. You might see a tired ox pulling a heavy cart slowly along a rutted road, the driver swaying to keep balance. Seasonal weather makes travel worse. Rain turns roads into mud baths. Snow and ice make paths treacherous. Flooding can wash away bridges and isolate communities for weeks. Despite these hardships, travel was vital for trade, pilgrimage, and social ties. Nobles and clergy traveled more often, with retinues and better accommodations, but even their journeys were uncomfortable by modern standards. Historians still debate how interconnected medieval Europe really was. Some argue that despite the challenges, trade routes and pilgrimages created surprising networks of communication and culture. Others point to isolation and localism dominating daily life. You might envy modern conveniences, cars, trains, paved highways, as you trudge along muddy tracks, boots soaked and heavy. Your feet blister, your clothes snag on brambles, and the smell of open latrines lingers in the air. Ferries or boats on rivers offered some relief, but were risky in storms or low water. Traveling by sea was even more perilous, with wooden ships, unpredictable weather, and pirates. Remember that in cities, narrow streets clogged with carts, horses, and pedestrians made moving slow and chaotic. The idea of personal space was foreign. Crowding was the norm. So, your journey continues slowly and painfully, a constant test of endurance. Medieval travel was a trial by mud, sweat, and uncertainty. And that's before you even reach your destination. Your back aches and your hands are calloused as you face the relentless grind of medieval labor. Work isn't just a daily task, it's your entire existence. From dawn's first light until the sun slips below the horizon, there's no pause, no time off, and certainly no weekends. The fields demand constant attention. Your muscles scream under heavy loads, and the threat of hunger always looms. If you're a peasant, your life revolves around subsistence farming, plowing fields with an ox or horse, planting, weeding, and harvesting. Each action must be done efficiently, or the family goes hungry. Crop failures are common, and a bad season means starvation. Tools are primitive, wooden handles and iron blades that dull quickly and break easily. The work is repetitive and exhausting. Even children are pressed into service, carrying water, tending animals, or helping in the fields. Labor isn't a choice, it's survival. There's no safety net, no sick days, no pensions. A broken limb or illness could mean destitution or death. If you're a craftsman or tradesman in town, your day is spent at a bench or forge, producing goods with rudimentary tools. Guilds regulate who can practice certain trades, controlling quality and competition. Still, the hours are long, and the pay barely enough to live on. Remember that medieval towns were often dirty and crowded, making workshop conditions grim. Smoke from forges and open fires mingled with the stench of refuse and unwashed bodies. Diseases spread quickly in these tight quarters. Farm labor is backbreaking but essential. Artisans provide needed goods. Both depend on relentless work. Your body is your capital, and it's always on loan to hardship. Oddly, some medieval peasants managed to take pride in their work, with seasonal festivals celebrating planting and harvest, offering brief respite and joy. These moments of levity were vital for morale in a hard life. Historians still argue how much control peasants had over their labor. While many were serfs tied to the land, others rented plots or had more autonomy. Either way, economic security was fragile. One fringe theory suggests that the sheer monotony of labor contributed to medieval folk songs and storytelling traditions, a way to distract the mind from toil. Singing while working helped pass time and built community. Work wasn't limited to the fields and workshops. Women had additional burdens: cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, and managing household economies. Their labor was invisible, but indispensable. In the harsh climate and poor nutrition, the physical toll was severe. Arthritis, injuries, and exhaustion were common. Medical care was minimal, so you learned to endure pain or risk infection. So, as the sun climbs high and the day stretches before you, your only certainty is relentless, punishing labor, because without it, survival isn't an option. You eye the meager meal laid out before you, knowing full well that medieval food safety was a gamble. Spoiled meat, contaminated water, and rotten vegetables lurked in every bite, ready to turn your stomach or worse. Without refrigeration or modern preservation techniques, food often went bad quickly, and the consequences were dire. Salt was your best friend, curing meats and fish to extend their shelf life, but it was expensive and not always available. Smoked and salted foods were common, but the heavy salt could leave you dehydrated and craving fresh fare that was often out of reach. Water sources were a minefield. Wells might be polluted by nearby cesspits, and rivers often doubled as dumping grounds for waste. Drinking water could carry cholera or dysentery, diseases that could kill swiftly. That's why many drank ale or wine instead. Fermentation killed harmful pathogens, but even those weren't guarantees of safety. You might eat a stew made from questionable ingredients, cooked over smoky fires that only partially killed bacteria. Sometimes bits of bone, gristle, or even insects found their way into meals. Parasites were common, hiding in undercooked meat or vegetables grown in fertilized soil. Historians still argue how much medieval people understood about food safety. While the germ theory of disease was centuries away, there was some folk wisdom, avoiding certain foods when sick or cooking thoroughly when possible. But hunger often trumped caution. Interestingly, some medieval cookbooks include surprisingly sophisticated recipes and preservation methods. Spices and herbs weren't just for flavor. Some had antimicrobial properties. Garlic, mustard, and vinegar played roles in both seasoning and safety. A quirky tidbit: some medieval texts recommended eating ground-up dried mice as a remedy for certain ailments. Not exactly appetizing, but it shows how desperation influenced diet. Food scarcity was a constant threat. Crop failures from bad weather or pests meant famine was never far away. When famine struck, the quality and quantity of food plummeted, and starvation became a grim reality. You might have heard of marginal foods, plants and animals people turned to in desperation, like nettles, dandelions, or even dogs and cats. Eating these was often a last resort, underscoring how precarious medieval diets were. Preservation techniques varied by region and class. Wealthy households had cellars and pantries, stocked with salted meats, dried fruits, and pickled vegetables. Poor peasants relied on what they could grow or hunt, with little chance to store surplus. You probably won't find fresh milk or dairy every day. Cheese was more common as it lasted longer, but the risk of contamination was still high. Butter was a luxury in some areas. Meals were often eaten communally, with everyone sharing from a common bowl or plate. The idea of individual portions was rare, increasing the risk of spreading disease through saliva or hands. Given these conditions, medieval people developed strong stomachs and robust immune systems, though that didn't guarantee survival. Food poisoning, parasites, and malnutrition were leading causes of death. Your stomach grumbles, and you wonder if the next meal will be any safer. But in a world without refrigerators, food inspectors, or sanitation standards, each bite carries risk. So, as you chew your salted bread or stew, remember, medieval food safety was a daily lottery, and surviving that alone was a feat. You find yourself sitting on a creaky wooden stool, eyeing the medieval healer with a mix of hope and dread. Medicine in your time is as much about ritual and superstition as it is about science, a delicate dance between what works, what might, and what could kill you faster. You probably won't survive a serious illness without stumbling through bizarre treatments that historians still argue about to this day. Bloodletting is the star of the show, the idea that sickness comes from an imbalance of bodily humors and that releasing bad blood can restore health. You might have a vein cut open or leeches applied to suck your blood, all while hoping the healer knows what they're doing. This was as common as modern aspirin, but far less predictable. Some fringe theories suggest the practice may have done more harm than good, yet it remained popular for centuries. Herbal remedies are the go-to alternative. You'll swallow concoctions made from everything from nettles and garlic to more exotic plants like mandrake or belladonna, known to be poisonous but used for their supposed magical properties. Some of these plants do have real medicinal effects, but the dosages were imprecise, making treatment a dangerous gamble. Then there are charms, prayers, and rituals. Religious faith was intertwined with healing, and many believed illness was a punishment for sins or a test from God. Healing might involve pilgrimages to holy sites, the touch of a saint's relic, or simply prayers chanted by monks. Surgery? Forget about it unless it's a simple wound dressing or tooth extraction. There were no anesthetics, and infection control was non-existent. Amputations were brutal affairs, often performed without understanding the risk of gangrene. You'd pray for a quick death or a miracle. Some practitioners, like barber surgeons, had rudimentary knowledge and tools, while others were quacks peddling snake oil. The lack of standard medical training meant outcomes varied wildly. Folk healers or wise women could be both lifesavers and targets of witch hunts. The role of hospitals was limited. They were often places of refuge rather than cure, offering beds and prayers more than treatment. Many patients were turned away due to overcrowding. A quirky fringe tidbit. One medieval remedy for epilepsy involved carrying a live frog around the neck, something you'd probably laugh at now, but it was taken seriously then. Despite all this, some treatments were surprisingly effective. Herbalists discovered antiseptic properties in certain plants, and cleanliness during wound care sometimes helped, though without germ theory, such knowledge was accidental. Historians still debate how much medieval medicine slowed progress or paved the way for modern science. The mixture of superstition and trial and error laid foundations for later discoveries, even if it felt like fumbling in the dark. So, when you next think about a trip to the doctor, be grateful you don't have to face bloodletting or frog necklaces. Medieval medical magic was as much a curse as a cure, and surviving it was another battle in your 24-hour ordeal. The bell tolls again, calling you to another round of prayers and rituals that punctuate your day like an unrelenting metronome. Religion in the Middle Ages wasn't just a part of life. It was the lens through which everything was understood and endured. From dawn till dusk, church bells chime relentlessly, compelling you to stop, bow, or pray, whether you want to or not. You probably won't survive the day without the church's shadow shaping every step you take. Every village and town has its parish church, the hub of social and spiritual life. Even if you can barely read, the rituals and ceremonies are ingrained deeply. Daily prayers, mass, confession, and feast days regulate time as much as the sun or the seasons. For many, religion is the only constant comfort amid the hardships of medieval existence. Pilgrimages to holy sites are both spiritual quests and social events. People endure grueling journeys hoping for miracles or forgiveness, But these trips are risky and exhausting. Merchants and thieves alike shadow pilgrims, turning faith into both salvation and peril. Clergy wield immense power, not only spiritually, but politically and economically. Tithes, mandatory church taxes, take a sizable portion of your meager earnings. Refusal isn't an option. The church's reach is total. Religious festivals provide rare breaks from toil. They're times of feasting, music, and dancing, but even then, strict observance of rules keeps everyone in line. The church's calendar is crowded with saints' days, fasts, and holy seasons, a rhythm of devotion and discipline. Superstitions blend with doctrine. Many believe in the presence of demons, witches, and angels influencing daily life. Amulets, holy water, and relics offer protection, but fear of sin and damnation is ever present. Historians still argue whether religion primarily offered solace or enforced control. Was it a genuine spiritual refuge or a means to maintain the status quo? Likely, it was both. The church also controlled education and knowledge. Monasteries preserved ancient texts and taught a privileged few. For common folk, learning to read was rare, and much understanding came from oral tradition and church instruction. You might feel oppressed by the constant demands. Confess your sins, tithe your crops, attend Mass. But the church's influence knitted communities together. It offered explanations for suffering and death that medicine or science could not. So as the bells toll again, you bow your head, caught between devotion, obligation, and the faint hope that faith might ease your burdens in a world full of uncertainty. Night falls, but peace does not come with the darkness. Instead, your fears multiply as shadows stretch across your humble home. The night is a place of monsters, mischief, and misery, a realm where superstition reigns and dangers lurk unseen. You probably won't survive the night without wrestling with your fears and the very real threats the dark holds. Medieval nights are pitch black, with no street lights or electric bulbs to chase away shadows. Candles and oil lamps offer faint, flickering protection, but are costly and easily extinguished by drafts. Most people go to bed early, but sleep is fragmented and restless. The absence of modern security means wild animals, thieves, and worse can threaten your home. Wolves, bears, and bandits were genuine risks. Villagers might leave weapons by their beds or sleep in shifts to guard against attack. Superstitions flourish in the dark. Spirits, demons, and witches are believed to roam freely at night. To ward them off, people hang herbs like sage and garlic or place charms near their beds. Some believed that wearing certain colors or symbols could protect the sleeper. The fear of night terrors and nightmares was widespread. Without understanding of sleep science, these experiences were often interpreted as visitations by evil forces or omens. People turned to prayers, holy water, or special rituals to safeguard sleep. Open fires and hearths provided warmth, but also hazards. Sparks could ignite straw beds or wooden beams, causing devastating fires in dense villages. The risk of burning down your home meant tending the fire carefully, but that sometimes left you cold in winter's grasp. Nighttime sanitation was non-existent. Chamber pots were often emptied only in the morning, adding to the foul smells. Streets were no safer in darkness, clogged with waste and debris. Sleep patterns differed from today. Scholars note that segmented sleep, 2 periods of rest broken by an hour or 2 of wakefulness, was common. During this quiet time, people might pray, reflect, or even visit neighbors. Historians still argue how much medieval people's understanding of night and sleep influenced their culture and health. Did their fragmented sleep patterns cause fatigue, or was it a natural rhythm lost to modern lifestyles? As you lie in your straw mattress, ears straining for sounds, you know the night is not a refuge, but a trial. Every creak, howl, or distant shout sharpens your senses. Sleep might come, but it's never deep or safe. So, as darkness envelops the world, Your survival depends not just on strength, but on courage against unseen terrors and the eternal human struggle to find rest amid chaos. You shiver as the seasons change, feeling the relentless grip of climate on your medieval home. There's no central heating or air conditioning here, just a stone or wooden hut, maybe a smoky hearth, and the mercy of weather that swings from bitter cold to scorching heat. Your survival depends as much on how you handle the climate as on what you eat or who you know. Winter is a brutal adversary. Thick woolen clothes and layered garments offer some protection, but cold seeps through cracks in walls and floors. Your breath fogs the air inside, mingling with the smoke of a low-burning fire. Firewood is precious, so the hearth is often small, and warmth rarely reaches all corners of your home. Frostbite and hypothermia lurk as constant threats, especially to children and the elderly. Summers are no easier. Without screens or ventilation, houses trap heat and stifling odors. Flies and mosquitoes swarm, biting and spreading disease. Open windows invite fresh air, but also animals and dust. Dehydration and heat exhaustion aren't well understood, but still harm many. Rain and storms turn roads into muddy quagmires, isolating villages and ruining crops. Floods can destroy homes and food stores, compounding hardship. Drought years bring famine. Your livelihood is tightly bound to the whims of nature, and a bad season can mean the difference between life and death. Medieval architecture reflects these challenges. Thatched roofs, small windows, and thick walls help shield inhabitants, but ventilation is poor. Smoke from indoor fires exits through holes or chimneys that are often rudimentary or absent, filling homes with haze and soot. Oddly, some medieval people believed that certain weather patterns were omens or punishments from God, linking climate to morality and fortune. Festivals and rituals sought to appease nature or divine forces, hoping to ensure good harvests. Historians still debate how much medieval societies adapted to climate variability. Some argue that resilience was built through crop diversity and communal sharing, while others point to repeated cycles of crisis that shaped political and social upheaval. You might recall that during the so-called Little Ice Age, Europe experienced colder and wetter conditions for centuries, worsening living conditions. Your ancestors lived through these swings, enduring long winters and short growing seasons. So, as you shiver in the cold or sweat in the heat, remember that climate was an ever-present, often merciless force shaping every medieval day. Your survival depended on how well you coped with the elements, because modern comforts were centuries away. The moment you step outside, your nostrils are assaulted by a cocktail of smells unlike anything you're used to. Smoky hearths, animal manure, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present stench of open sewers. The smell of medieval life isn't a spa day. It's a sensory overload that clings to your clothes and skin all day. No modern sewage systems mean waste is tossed into streets, rivers, or cesspits, often overflowing and spreading filth. You might pass by piles of rotting garbage or animal carcasses left to decay. Towns reek, especially in warmer months, when heat accelerates the stench. Personal hygiene is minimal, so body odor mingles with the smells of the environment. Bathing is infrequent. Linen shirts are washed rarely, and woolen outer garments even less. Smoke from fires adds another layer, creating a haze that settles in your lungs and on your skin. Animals share your living spaces. Chickens peck near your feet. Pigs root in the mud nearby. Horses and oxen stand tethered outside. Their waste contributes heavily to the smell, but also provides fertilizer for crops. Interestingly, some medieval folks used herbs, flowers, or fragrant oils to mask odors. Posies, bunches of lavender or rosemary might be carried or hung in homes. This nosegay tradition was practical and symbolic, warding off disease and evil spirits alike. Historians still argue how much these smells affected health beyond discomfort. Some believe the strong odors may have deterred flies and other pests. Others think they worsened disease spread. Either way, noses weren't spared. You might recall the miasma theory, the belief that bad smells caused illness. This misconception lingered for centuries, influencing public health policies that focused on clearing foul odors, but not the underlying germs. Your clothes absorb the smells deeply. Wool retains scents long after washing. Smoke and sweat become part of the fabric. People might have recognized each other by scent alone, an intimate and unavoidable marker of identity. Despite the stench, life went on. Markets buzzed, children played, and neighbors chatted, though often at arm's length to avoid the worst smells. You grow accustomed, or perhaps resigned, to the pungent atmosphere. So as you breathe in deeply, though you might wish you didn't, remember that medieval life was a sensory assault. The smell of survival was raw, real, and unavoidable, a stark contrast to our modern, sanitized world. Your place in the world is set before you even take your first breath. In the Middle Ages, social status isn't just a label, it's a life sentence, defining your survival chances, opportunities, and daily struggles. You are born lucky or doomed by the family into which you arrive, and there's no escape from that fate. If you're born a noble, you inherit lands, wealth, and power. Your education includes reading, writing, and managing estates, and you live in relative comfort, insulated from many hardships. But even nobility faces political dangers, rivalries, and the constant threat of war. Your life might be longer, but it's far from carefree. For peasants and serfs, life means toil under the yoke of landlords. Bound to the land, you owe labor, crops, and taxes, often barely enough to survive. You have little control over your destiny. Marriage, occupation, and residence are dictated by social structures. Historians still argue how rigid medieval social hierarchies truly were. Some evidence shows limited social mobility through marriage, trade, or the church, while other records depict a more static, inherited order. Your clothing, language, and even mannerisms signal your class. Sumptuary laws regulated what colors, fabrics, and accessories different classes could wear, reinforcing divisions. Nobles might wear fine silks and gold jewelry, while peasants wore rough wool and leather. Access to justice, healthcare, and education heavily favored the upper classes. If you were poor, illness, injury, or legal troubles often spelled doom. Religious roles offered some avenues for advancement. Monasteries educated sons of lesser nobility or talented commoners, providing a path to influence and relative security. The burden of social status wasn't just economic, it shaped your worldview. Pride, honor, and duty tied nobles to their class, while peasants accepted their hardships as divinely ordained. Interestingly, some fringe scholars suggest that folk tales and festivals sometimes allowed temporary role reversals, letting commoners mock or impersonate nobility in a controlled setting, a social valve that eased tensions. Your birth defines who you can marry, what jobs you can do, and how others treat you. It determines the education you receive and the respect you command. So, as you navigate medieval life, remember that your social status is not just background. It's a defining survival factor that shapes every moment of your day. You watch children in the village, tiny figures darting through the muddy streets and fields. But childhood here is no carefree idle. Play is scarce, and survival is a harsh teacher. You probably won't survive childhood unless you navigate dangers at every turn, disease, hard labor, and the ever-present risk of death. From a young age, children are apprentices in the school of survival. Boys might herd animals, help with planting, or learn trades from family members, while girls assist in household chores, cooking, and caring for siblings. Schooling is a rare privilege, mostly reserved for noble or clergy offspring. Child mortality rates are staggeringly high. Many children don't live past their 5th birthday. Disease, malnutrition, and accidents claim lives regularly. Smallpox, measles, and respiratory infections spread rapidly in crowded homes and schools. Families often bore these losses stoically, a grim part of life. Nutrition for children is poor, as the whole family's diet is meager. Breastfeeding practices varied, and some infants were fed gruel or diluted milk too early, leading to illness. Despite these hardships, medieval children found moments of joy. Games with sticks and stones, simple dolls, and songs brought fleeting happiness. Festivals allowed children to participate in communal celebrations, though always under adult watch. Some fringe theories propose that childhood as a distinct, protected phase is a relatively modern concept. In medieval society, children were often viewed as miniature adults, expected to contribute early and understand their role in the family and society quickly. Religious instruction was central to upbringing. Catechism and prayers were taught early, and moral lessons were strict. Education for noble children included reading, writing, and etiquette. Boys trained in arms, girls in household management and social skills. You might be sent away as a page or apprentice in a lord's household, a chance for advancement, but also a tough, demanding life. Families treasured surviving children as precious assets, but the emotional toll of losing many was heavy, though seldom expressed openly. So, as you see children grow amidst hardship and play, remember their journey is a perilous one, with survival often a matter of luck as much as care. Every misstep in medieval life risks brutal consequences. Laws are harsh, enforcement swift, and punishments severe. You probably won't survive a serious transgression without facing fines, public shaming, or worse. Think stocks, whipping, or even execution. Justice here isn't about rehabilitation, it's about order and deterrence. Local lords or manorial courts administer justice, often blending secular and ecclesiastical law. Common crimes range from theft and poaching to blasphemy and heresy. Even minor infractions like drunkenness or disrespect to authority can bring harsh penalties. The public nature of punishments is key. They're meant to instill fear. Stocks and pillories expose offenders to ridicule, while executions are spectacles reinforcing the Lord's power. Sometimes, entire communities suffer collective punishments for crimes committed by individuals. You might encounter trial by ordeal, where divine intervention supposedly reveals guilt. Walking over hot coals or submersion in water tests your innocence, but outcomes are as random as a coin toss. Medieval law also reflects social hierarchy. Nobles often receive leniency. Peasants bear the brunt. Serfs have limited rights, and escaping punishment is harder for the poor. Historians still debate how effective these legal systems were. Some argue harshness maintained social order, others see them as tools of oppression, perpetuating inequality. A quirky fringe fact: some towns banned swearing under threat of fines, showing that even language was controlled. Justice was swift and local. There were no police as we know them. Community members often acted as enforcers, blurring lines between law and vigilantism. You live under constant threat that a mistake, accidental or intentional, could ruin your life or end it. Fear of punishment enforces obedience, but also breeds resentment and secret defiance. So, as you navigate daily life, remember that law and order are brutal in the Middle Ages, and survival often depends on walking a narrow line between obedience and necessity. Even amid endless toil and hardship, life in the Middle Ages isn't without moments of lightness. Entertainment and escapism provide brief but vital respites. You probably won't survive the relentless grind without these fleeting joys, whether it's a traveling minstrel song, a village fair, or a simple game among friends. Fairs are a highlight of medieval life. Once or twice a year, markets swell with visitors, merchants, and entertainers. You might watch jugglers, hear troubadours sing tales of chivalry, or witness feats of strength and daring. These events offer not just commerce, but social connection and laughter. Storytelling is another key escape. Oral traditions pass down legends, moral tales, and humor. In taverns or around hearths, stories bind communities, distract from daily suffering, and pass on cultural knowledge. Games and sports vary by region and class. Peasants might play simple ball games or wrestling, while nobles organize tournaments and archery contests. Gambling is common despite church disapproval. Religious festivals also double as entertainment, blending piety with music, dance, and feasting. The carnival season before Lent is notorious for its revelry and role reversals. Historians still debate how widespread and accessible entertainment was. Some argue it was mainly a privilege of towns and nobility. Others highlight folk culture's vibrancy in rural areas. Oddly, some medieval entertainments had darker sides. Public executions and punishments drew crowds, turning cruelty into spectacle. Animal baiting and blood sports entertained some, reflecting different sensibilities. Music is central to medieval culture. Instruments like lutes, hurdy-gurdies, and bagpipes fill the air, and dancing is both celebration and social ritual. Literacy was low, so most culture was experienced live, making community participation vital. These moments of joy, however brief, sustain you through the grimness of daily life. They're reminders that even in hardship, the human spirit seeks connection, laughter, and beauty. So as you hear the distant melody or smell the roasting meat at a fair, hold on to that spark. It's a lifeline in a world often overshadowed by struggle. Hunger is never far from your thoughts. Food scarcity and famine loom like dark clouds over medieval life, threatening to wipe out entire communities with merciless regularity. You probably won't survive a famine year without enduring unimaginable hardship, starvation, and social upheaval. Crop failures caused by bad weather, pests, or disease could devastate your harvest. Since most of your diet depends on a successful yield of grains like wheat, rye, or barley, even a single bad season spells disaster. Stored grain might be spoiled or stolen, and there's no government safety net to catch the falling. Famine isn't just about empty stomachs. It weakens immune systems, making disease outbreaks more deadly. Starvation leads to desperation, increasing crime and conflict over scarce resources. Communities sometimes resort to eating famine foods like bark, roots, or even animals not typically considered edible. These survival foods are bitter, tough, and nutritionally poor, but they keep some alive. Historians debate how widespread famine truly was versus localized hunger. Some argue that medieval societies had coping mechanisms like grain trade and communal storage. Others highlight repeated cycles of crisis that kept millions on the edge. Charitable institutions like monasteries provided some relief, distributing food to the poor during hard times. Still, aid was limited and often insufficient. Famine also influenced politics and social structures. Peasant revolts sometimes erupted in response to food shortages and oppressive taxation. You might recall that the Great Famine of the early 14th century coincided with climate changes that shortened growing seasons, worsening the crisis. Food prices soared during famines, making basic staples unaffordable for many. Starvation and malnutrition crippled workforces, economies, and armies. In desperate times, people turned to the church and superstition for explanations and hope, blaming divine wrath or witchcraft. So as you endure the gnawing hunger and watch your neighbors weaken, remember that famine was a grim reality shaping medieval survival, a cruel test few could pass unscathed. Nighttime arrives again, but your sleep isn't the uninterrupted rest you might expect. Instead, you experience what scholars call segmented sleep, 2 distinct periods separated by an hour or 2 awake. You probably won't survive well on modern sleep patterns here. Your body follows a rhythm shaped by candlelight and necessity. After the first sleep, you lie awake, sometimes for an hour or more. This time isn't idle. People might pray, meditate, engage in quiet tasks, or even visit neighbors. Sleep wasn't a solid block, but a cycle, adapted to the rhythms of medieval life. The absence of electric light meant your circadian rhythms were closely tied to the sun. Candles were expensive and short-lived, so most activity diminished after dark. Sleeping arrangements were crowded and uncomfortable. Sharing beds with family members and animals meant noise, smells, and disturbances. Privacy was rare, and rest was often broken. Historians still argue how segmented sleep affected health and productivity. Some believe it allowed for mental rest and reflection, while others see it as a source of fatigue. Nighttime fears and superstitions made sleep uneasy. Dreams were considered meaningful, sometimes warnings or messages. People took precautions, charms, prayers, and protective rituals to guard their rest. Sleep was also vulnerable to environmental factors: cold, noise, pests, and light. Fires and hearths provided warmth, but flickering light and crackling sounds could disrupt slumber. The concept of sleep hygiene was unknown. What mattered was survival. You adapted to the interruptions as best you could. You might recall that segmented sleep patterns have been observed in pre-industrial societies even today, suggesting this rhythm is natural but lost in modern times. So, as you close your eyes tonight, remember that restful, uninterrupted sleep is a modern luxury. Your medieval ancestors lived in a world where sleep was fragmented, and surviving the night meant adapting to its many challenges. Animals are everywhere, your constant companions, helpers, and sometimes hazards. You probably won't survive long without the company of livestock, as they are woven tightly into the fabric of medieval life, sharing your living quarters, your food, and your daily risks. In the countryside, pigs, chickens, cows, and sheep often live right alongside people, either indoors or in small pens attached to homes. This closeness means warmth during cold nights, but also brings smells, noise, and disease. Animal waste adds to the already heavy burden of filth in villages, attracting flies and vermin. Horses and oxen are indispensable for plowing fields and transporting goods. Caring for these animals requires daily labor, feeding, and protection from predators. Their health directly impacts your survival, as a broken plow animal could mean lost crops. Urban animals include cats and dogs, which serve as pest controllers or companions, but their hygiene and behavior are less regulated than today. Stray animals roam freely, sometimes scavenging or causing disturbances. The presence of animals inside homes increases exposure to fleas and ticks, carriers of diseases such as plague and typhus. The risks to health are ever present, but so are the benefits: food, clothing materials, labor, and security. Historians debate how medieval people balanced the benefits of animals with the dangers. Some evidence suggests efforts to segregate animals at night, while others point to the inevitability of cohabitation. Animals also have cultural and symbolic roles. They appear in folklore, art, and religious stories, embodying virtues or vices. Your day includes feeding, milking, cleaning, and tending to these creatures, tasks that consume significant time but are vital to survival. So, as animals cluck, bray, or moo near you, remember they are not just background noise. They are essential players in the medieval story of survival, entwined with human fate in complex, often messy ways. You feel the constant tension beneath your feet, knowing that one careless spark could ignite disaster. Fire hazards and sudden conflagrations haunt medieval towns and villages, making survival a constant gamble against flames. You probably won't survive a fire in your community without luck or quick thinking. Medieval homes are built primarily of wood and thatch, highly flammable materials. Open hearths, candles, and oil lamps provide light and warmth, but are also constant sources of ignition. Chimneys are rudimentary or absent, allowing smoke and sparks to fill the room. Fires spread rapidly in tightly packed towns, where narrow streets and closely built houses turn into fuel lines. Entire neighborhoods could be destroyed in hours, leaving thousands homeless and destitute. There's no organized firefighting force, Villagers rely on buckets of water, blankets, and sheer manpower to combat blazes. Some towns have rudimentary fire watches or regulations on hearth maintenance, but enforcement is spotty. Smoke inhalation and burns claim many lives before flames reach them. Fire deaths are common, and rebuilding is a monumental effort, often requiring years. Historians debate how often catastrophic fires reshaped medieval urban landscapes. Some argue they spurred changes in building codes and urban planning. Others see them as inevitable tragedies. Fires also disrupt food supplies, destroying granaries and markets. Starvation often follows. On a fringe note, some medieval folks believed fire was both a purifier and a punishment from God, adding a spiritual dimension to disaster. You might recall famous fires like London's Great Fire centuries later, but medieval towns faced these threats constantly. So, as you warm yourself by the hearth or light a candle, remember, you're living with the ever-present risk of fire, a peril as old as civilization itself, and a deadly factor in medieval survival. Pregnancy and childbirth are no gentle journeys here. If you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you probably won't survive the ordeal without facing overwhelming pain, danger, and uncertainty. Childbirth is a risky event, fraught with complications that modern medicine has all but eliminated. Prenatal care is minimal to non-existent. Most knowledge comes from oral tradition, midwives' experience, and religious rituals. Superstition often blends with practice. Charms, prayers, and herbs are used in hopes of a safe delivery. Labor is long and painful, with no anesthesia or sterile conditions. Infection is a deadly threat, especially postpartum fever, which claimed countless mothers. Infant mortality is high too. Many babies never survive the first few weeks. Midwives play a crucial role, skilled but lacking formal medical training. They assist births in homes, using simple tools and experience. Some noble women might receive care from physicians, but even then, outcomes are uncertain. Historians still debate how much control women had over childbirth and health decisions. Some argue midwives held significant community power. Others suggest male physicians increasingly encroached on their domain. Nutrition during pregnancy affects outcomes but is often inadequate, especially for poor women. Heavy labor continues until birth, adding stress. The social pressure to produce heirs, especially male, weighs heavily. Failure can bring stigma or worse. A quirky fringe fact: some medieval texts recommended placing a cat under the bed to ease labor. More superstition than science, but a sign of desperate hope. Despite the dangers, childbirth was also celebrated with rituals and community support, marking life's continuation amid hardship. So, as you face the miracle and terror of bringing life into the world, remember that survival is not guaranteed, but the human spirit endures through pain and hope. You bend down to scoop water from the village well, but even this simple act carries risk. Clean water is scarce and precious in the Middle Ages, and you probably won't survive long without it being contaminated in some way. Drinking water is often a vector for deadly diseases, complicating the already brutal challenges of daily life. Wells are the main source of fresh water, but many are shallow and vulnerable to pollution. Nearby latrines, cesspits, and animal waste seep into groundwater, turning your water into a cocktail of bacteria and parasites. The smell may be faint, but the danger is real. Rivers and streams are also used for drinking, washing, and disposing of waste, a triple threat that ensures contamination. In towns, these waterways become open sewers with no effective sanitation systems to separate waste from water supplies. Boiling water could kill pathogens, but fuel scarcity and lack of awareness mean it's rarely done. Some people turn to ale or wine for safer drinking options, relying on fermentation to kill germs, but these beverages lack hydration benefits and aren't always available. Historians still argue how medieval societies understood water safety. Some evidence shows rudimentary regulations and efforts to protect wells, but enforcement was limited. Contaminated water was a leading cause of disease outbreaks, including cholera and dysentery. Communal fountains and cisterns existed in some towns, but their cleanliness varied widely. Wealthier households sometimes had private wells or collected rainwater. A quirky fact: some medieval texts suggest adding herbs or vinegar to water as a rudimentary purification method, practical or placebo. It reflected attempts to improve safety. Access to clean water also affected social status and gender roles. Women often bore the responsibility of collecting water, walking long distances daily, exposing them to fatigue and danger. So as you sip from the village well, remember that clean water was a precious and fragile resource, and your survival depended on it more than almost anything else. Death is never far away. It follows you through every step of your day like a shadow. In the Middle Ages, you probably won't survive long without confronting the omnipresence of mortality and the rituals that accompany it. Death shapes not only your life, but the entire community's fabric. Funerals are frequent affairs, sometimes daily events in larger towns. Bodies are often buried quickly to prevent disease spread, sometimes in mass graves during plagues. Burial practices vary by region and status, but graveyards are crowded, and cemeteries can be sources of contamination themselves. The church presides over death, offering prayers for souls and guiding mourning rituals. Masses and requiems provide structure to grief, and memorials reinforce social ties. Remember that religious comfort is a balm in a brutal world. The Black Death's devastation lingers in collective memory, heightening fears and influencing art, literature, and culture. Dance of Death motifs remind all that death comes for everyone, regardless of rank. Historians still debate how the constant presence of death influenced medieval psychology and social cohesion. Some suggest it fostered resilience, others highlight fatalism and despair. Grave goods, burial orientation, and rituals reflect beliefs about the afterlife. Proper burial is crucial for a peaceful soul, adding pressure on families despite scarce resources. You witness the toll on families: children orphaned, elders lost, and communities thinned. Mourning periods are strict but short, as survival demands continuation. A fringe belief held that souls lingered near graves, requiring prayers and offerings to prevent hauntings. Ghost stories and legends often grew from these fears. So, as you pass yet another funeral procession or see a new grave, remember that death is not a distant concept, but an ever-present reality in medieval life, deeply entwined with survival and faith. Your day winds down, but the endless cycle of toil and hardship is far from over. Endless labor, uncertainty, and struggle define medieval survival. Moments of relief are rare and fleeting. You probably won't survive long without facing exhaustion, hunger, and the heavy weight of daily battles. Even after work, there's more to do: tending animals, repairing tools, preparing for the next day. Your body aches, but rest is a luxury. Food is sparse, warmth is limited, and worry about the future gnaws at your mind. Community bonds offer some support. Neighbors share news, labor, and sometimes food. Festivals and religious holidays break the monotony, offering joy and hope, but they are brief flickers in a harsh world. Historians debate whether medieval people lived in constant despair or found meaning despite adversity. Many suggest resilience, faith, and social ties provided strength. You cling to hope that seasons will improve, children will survive, and peace will last. Survival is a daily victory, not a given. So as you close your eyes, weary and hopeful, remember that medieval life was a test of endurance, where every moment counted and every breath was a triumph against odds stacked high. The sun dips low, and the world softens into quiet shadows. You've walked the long, rough path of a medieval day, feeling its cold, its hunger, its relentless trials pressing down. But now, as the night cradles you gently, know that you've done more than survive. You've glimpsed the grit, the struggle, and the resilience that shaped human history. Let your breath slow and your muscles loosen. Feel the warmth of a hearth you can't see, the soft rustle of straw beneath you, and the gentle murmur of a life lived in the heartbeat of survival. The dark isn't just an end, it's a pause, a whisper inviting you to rest, to dream, and to carry forward the strength of countless souls before you. Close your eyes, surrender to the calm, and let sleep wrap you in its quiet embrace. The Middle Ages may have been harsh, but your journey through them is a story of enduring spirit, a reminder of how far we've come, and how deeply connected we remain to those who lived before. Sleep well, and until next time, sweet dreams.